The image on that small screen stopped my heart. Not because of the trees, not because of the fading afternoon light cutting through the pines at the back of our property, but because of the figure standing in the clearing, 60 yards past the old stone wall, holding what looked like a measuring tape. It was my son. Welcome to Dad's silent revenge, where the truth always finds its way home. Marcus was 38 years old, broad-shouldered, wearing the dark blazer he always put on when he wanted to look serious. And he was pacing the ground in slow, deliberate lines, pressing small orange stakes into the dirt every few feet, connecting them with a thin, white ribbon. I had launched the drone 20 minutes earlier because the deer had been getting into Eleanor's garden again. She loved that garden, grew tomatoes, sunflowers, and sweet basil every summer without fail. I wanted footage of where they were coming in so I could patch the fence before she noticed the damage. I had not expected to find my son in the woods behind our house. I had not expected to watch him measure the ground like a man who already knew exactly how much space he needed. I zoomed in. The orange stakes formed a rectangle, 6 feet long, 3 feet wide. I sat down. My legs gave way before my mind could catch up with what my eyes were showing me. The chair in my study creaked under the sudden weight of me. The drone hovered above the pines, its camera perfectly still, its lens recording every second of what my son was doing in that clearing. Eleanor was upstairs, napping, the way she had been doing most afternoons since the health scare 6 weeks ago, and Marcus was in our woods, measuring the ground, pressing stakes, stretching ribbon between them. I did not call out to him. I did not storm down the back stairs and confront him through the tree line. I am not that kind of man. Never have been. I pressed save on the drone application. Then I sat very still in my study, watching my son walk the perimeter of that ribbon rectangle one more time, his lips moving like a man doing quiet calculations. And I thought about all the small things that had not made sense over the past 6 weeks. They were starting to make terrible, perfect sense now. 6 weeks ago, Eleanor had a dizzy spell in the kitchen. She grabbed the counter, called my name. I found her pale and trembling, holding a dish towel like a lifeline. We went to the hospital that same afternoon. They ran tests, kept her overnight, and by the next morning her doctor, a careful and measured man named Dr. Harlan Briggs, told us her blood pressure had spiked and her iron was critically low. Serious. Treatable. Nothing that rest, medication, and a change in diet would not address. We were relieved. I held Eleanor's hand in that hospital room and we talked about our garden and our plans to drive up to Vermont in the fall the way we used to before the years got busy. Marcus arrived the following day. He had not visited in 8 months. Business, he always said. The consulting firm, the travel, the clients who needed him. I accepted those explanations the way you accept weather. You don't argue with it, you just dress accordingly. But he came now. Fast. With a bag packed for a 2-week stay, a new somber expression I had not seen on him before, and a series of questions that struck me as slightly odd but not yet alarming. He asked about Eleanor's medications. He asked if she had a primary care directive on file. He asked, almost casually, over coffee on the second morning, whether our estate documents were current. I told him they were. He nodded. Said nothing more. But he wrote something in his phone. I noticed. I always notice. 42 years of running a hardware business teaches you to read people the way you read a ledger. Line by line, every entry matters. Every number that doesn't add up is a problem waiting to name itself. Eleanor adored him being home. She made his favorite meals. She laughed more. The color came back into her face faster than the doctors had predicted. She did not know he had already started looking at her like a man watching a clock. I did not know it either. Not yet. But the drone had just given me the first full picture. And now I needed to understand what I was truly looking at. 2 days after the drone footage, I found the brochures. Marcus had left his dark blazer hanging on the hook by the back door. He was out in the driveway on a call, pacing the way he always did when he was working through numbers. I walked past the hook. The blazer shifted slightly in the draft from the open window. A folded paper slipped halfway out of the inner pocket. I stopped. I am not the type of man who goes through another person's belongings. I was raised to respect privacy the way you respect a property line. You do not cross it without permission. But I thought about that ribbon in the woods. Those orange stakes. That rectangle. I reached into the pocket. There were 3 brochures. Folded neatly. Printed on heavy cream paper, with tasteful photographs of floral arrangements and dark wood interiors. They were from Callaway & Sons Funeral Home, 40 minutes north of our town. The first brochure covered casket selections. The second covered burial plot options and ground preparation. The third was a price sheet for full-service arrangements. Someone had circled several items in pencil, quietly, lightly, like a man who intended to erase the marks later but had not gotten around to it yet. I set the brochures back exactly as I found them. Then I reached into the opposite pocket. A business card. Raymond Chalk. Attorney at law. Estate planning and asset liquidation. A downtown office address. And below the phone number, in Marcus's own handwriting, a single word and a dollar amount. The word was farmland. The number had 6 figures. I put the card back, smoothed the lapel, walked to my study, closed the door softly. Our farmland. The 12 acres Eleanor's father had left her. The property we had protected through 3 recessions, 2 droughts, and 1 offer from a developer we had declined without a second thought because Eleanor said her father's hands had turned that soil and she would not sell it while she was breathing. Marcus had written down a price for land that was not his to sell. His mother was still breathing. She was upstairs right now, resting, dreaming about Vermont. I opened my desk drawer, took out a legal pad and a pen, and I began to write down every strange thing that had happened since my son came home. The private investigator's name was Carl Deaton, a retired county sheriff's deputy. Compact, quiet, with the kind of face that doesn't react to much. I had used him once before, 12 years ago, when a supplier had been padding invoices from the hardware store. He had solved that problem in 9 days. I called him on a Tuesday morning while Eleanor was at her follow-up appointment with Dr. Briggs. I told him everything: the drone footage, the brochures, the card, the dollar amount in Marcus's handwriting. Carl listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Give me 72 hours." He called back in 48. What he found was worse than I had built myself up to expect. 3 weeks earlier, a joint savings account had been opened at a regional bank in the next county. The account listed 2 names, Marcus Allen Greer and Eleanor Ruth Greer. Eleanor had never mentioned it. Eleanor had never been to that bank. The signature on the account application, Carl told me carefully, did not match the signature on file at our primary bank. He had compared them side by side with a document examiner he trusted. Someone had signed Eleanor's name. Someone had opened an account in her name without her knowledge. And over the 3 weeks since the account opened, 4 transfers had been made into it, small enough amounts to avoid automatic flags, large enough, collectively, to matter. The transfers came from a holding account linked to Raymond Chalk's law office. I set the phone down for a moment, looked out the window at the garden. Eleanor tended every spring. The tomatoes were coming in. She had tied the vines to stakes just last week, humming while she worked, telling me about a recipe she wanted to try. She had no idea her name was on a bank account she had never signed for. She had no idea money was already moving. I picked up the phone again. I told Carl to keep going. Dr. Harlan Briggs had been Eleanor's physician for 11 years. He was a careful man, methodical, the kind of doctor who reads your full file before he walks into the room. I trusted him because I had watched him work, and careful men are rare enough that you notice them when they appear. I called him on a Thursday afternoon and asked if we could speak privately. He said, of course. I drove to his office after hours. We sat across from each other in a room full of framed diplomas and the smell of antiseptic and old carpet. I asked him directly, had anyone called him recently asking about Eleanor's condition? He paused. Then he told me. Yes, he had received 2 calls, both from a man who identified himself as Marcus Greer, Eleanor's son. The first call came the day after Eleanor's hospital discharge. The caller had asked detailed questions about Eleanor's long-term prognosis, about the likelihood of her condition deteriorating, about what a worst-case progression might look like. Dr. Briggs said he had answered carefully and honestly. Eleanor's condition was being managed well, and there was no reason to expect significant decline. The caller had then asked, and Dr. Briggs's voice tightened slightly as he recounted this, whether Eleanor was considered competent to manage her own financial affairs. Dr. Briggs said he had ended that line of questioning immediately. The second call came 10 days later. Similar questions. A slightly different angle. The caller had mentioned the phrase cognitive diminishment, asked whether Dr. Briggs had observed any signs of it in Eleanor. He had not. Eleanor was sharp as winter air. But the calls had bothered him. He had made a note in her file. I asked if I could have a copy of those notes. He printed them without hesitation. I folded them carefully and put them in the inside pocket of my own jacket. I was building something. Quietly, the way you build anything that is meant to last. Foundation first, one piece at a time, never rushing, never showing your hand until the structure is complete enough to hold weight. Marcus had no idea his father was building. He thought the old man was grieving. He had mistaken my silence for surrender. Carl Deaton had placed a small digital recorder in my study. Not illegally. I owned the room. I owned the house. Every inch of this property carried my name on the deed alongside Eleanor's, and I had every right to record conversations that occurred within those walls. I positioned the recorder behind the old clock on the bookshelf. Eleanor's grandfather had built that clock. Heavy oak, a permanent fixture. No one ever moved it, and no one would think to look behind it. I told Marcus I needed to run into town for a few hours. Hardware store business, I said. He nodded, already reaching for his phone. I drove 2 miles, parked on a side road, waited. Carl monitored the recorder remotely. He called me after 47 minutes. He played me the audio through the phone. Marcus's voice. Low. Confident. The tone he used when he thought no one important was listening. He was talking to Raymond Chalk. The farmland, Marcus said, needs to be listed within 30 days of the event. Chalk's voice replied that the account structure was already in place, and the title transfer had been prepared in draft form. Marcus asked about the timeline for probate. Chalk said they could move to expedite given the documentation already assembled. Then Marcus asked, "What if the old man contests it?" Chalk's reply was smooth and practiced. "The power of attorney we have on file covers the assets jointly held. Your father's contesting ability is limited once the POA is activated." I sat on that side road in my truck, and I breathed very slowly for a long time. They had forged a power of attorney. They had built a legal mechanism designed to remove my ability to protect Eleanor or our assets the moment something happened to her. Something they were clearly planning to help happen. I drove back to town, not home, to my own attorney's office. Her name was Patricia Morse. 40 years in estate and family law. The sharpest legal mind in our county, and a woman who had seen every kind of family betrayal there is. I sat down across from her and I laid out everything I had. The drone footage, Carl's bank findings, Dr. Briggs's notes, the recorded conversation. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "We need to move quickly, and we need to move right." I said, "That is exactly what I intend to do." Patricia worked fast. Within 48 hours, she had filed a formal challenge to the power of attorney document Marcus and Chalk had assembled. A forensic document examiner confirmed what Carl had suspected. Eleanor's signature had been fabricated. The notarization stamp on the document belonged to a notary who, when contacted by Patricia's investigator, stated she had never met Eleanor Greer and had never notarized any document on her behalf. The notary was frightened. She cooperated fully. Meanwhile, I made several quiet changes at home. I moved key financial documents to a secured location Patricia controlled. I had Eleanor's will reviewed and reaffirmed with 3 witnesses present. I opened a new account at a bank Marcus had no knowledge of, and transferred the household operating funds there. I did all of this without telling Eleanor. Not because I wanted to keep her in the dark, but because I needed her to remain calm and natural in Marcus's presence while we finished building the case. Every interaction she had with him was potentially important. Every question he asked her, every document he might casually mention, every phone call she might overhear. Eleanor had always been a better actor than people gave her credit for. I also called the State Bar Association and submitted a formal complaint against Raymond Chalk, including the audio recording and the bank documentation. A state investigator called me back within 2 days. The wheels were turning, slowly, properly, the way they need to turn, when you want them to keep turning all the way to the end. Marcus, for his part, was growing slightly impatient. I could see it in the way he checked his phone during dinner. The way he asked Eleanor, too casually, how she was feeling, whether she had been sleeping well, whether the dizziness had come back at all. He was watching for something. He was waiting for a change in her condition that he needed. He did not know that the condition he was counting on had already been thoroughly documented as manageable by a doctor whose notes were now in a legal file with my attorney. He did not know that the ground he had staked out in the woods had been photographed, time-stamped, and submitted as evidence. He did not know that the old man had been 3 steps ahead of him for 3 weeks. He thought he was hunting. He was already caught. I had dreaded this moment more than any other. More than the confrontation. More than the legal proceedings, more than anything that had come before or would come after. Because Eleanor had loved that boy since the first morning she held him. She had built her entire understanding of motherhood around the belief that a child, no matter how complicated, carries something essentially good inside them. She had held on to that belief through every disappointment Marcus had given her over the years. I sat with her at the kitchen table on a quiet Sunday evening. The light was the particular amber color it gets in late September, coming low through the window over the garden. I set my laptop in front of her. I pressed play. She watched the drone footage without speaking. 40 seconds of her son walking our woods, measuring the ground, pressing orange stakes into the earth between our pine trees. She did not cry immediately. She watched it twice. Then she looked at the window. Then the tears came. Not loud. Eleanor does not grieve loudly. She wept the way she does everything, quietly, with her hands folded in her lap and her spine straight. I showed her the rest. The bank account in her name, the forged signature, the phone records from Marcus to Dr. Briggs, the audio from the study. Each one I placed in front of her like evidence, because that is what it was. When it was all laid out, she sat for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "What do you need me to do?" I took her hand. I told her. She nodded. And then Eleanor Ruth Greer, 67 years old, a woman who grew tomatoes and sunflowers, and had nursed this family through 4 decades of ordinary life, straightened her shoulders and became someone Marcus had never thought to account for. His mother, watching, ready. We were no longer just waiting for him to move. We were ready to close the door when he did. We invited Marcus to stay for a Sunday dinner 3 days later. He accepted. He seemed almost relaxed that evening. Whatever timeline he had been working against, he appeared to believe he was still on schedule. Patricia had arranged for a county investigator and a representative from the state bar to be present in the living room before Marcus arrived. They waited quietly out of sight. Carl Deaton sat in his car at the end of the driveway. Eleanor made pot roast. Marcus complimented it twice. After dessert, I set a folder on the table. I told him I needed to discuss some estate matters. He nodded, reached for his coffee. The picture of a cooperative son. I opened the folder. I placed the drone photograph in front of him first. The color left his face so quickly it was almost like watching water drain from a basin. I placed the bank documents next. Then the forged POA with the forensic examiner's report paper clipped to it. Then the phone records showing his calls to Dr. Briggs. Then the transcript of the recorded conversation with Raymond Chalk. I laid them out one at a time. Slowly, deliberately. The way you lay out a hand of cards when you already know what every card in the room contains. Marcus said nothing for a very long time. Then he started to speak. Explanations. Justifications. The voice of a man trying to rebuild a story faster than the evidence can dismantle it. Eleanor spoke. She said his name once. Just his name. The way only a mother can say a name and make it carry the weight of everything she has ever known about a person. He stopped talking. The county investigator stepped into the dining room. What followed was not loud. There was no shouting. No overturned chairs. No dramatic collapse. Just the slow, steady arrival of consequences, walking through our front door like something that had always been on its way and had finally found the address. Raymond Chalk was arrested the following morning. His law license was suspended pending investigation before the week was out. Marcus was escorted out of our house that evening by the county investigator, his car keys in his pocket, his blazer straight, his face a careful blank that I recognized as the last defense of a man who has run out of every other option. The orange stakes in the woods were removed the next day. I pulled them out myself, one by one, in the quiet morning light. Eleanor watched from the kitchen window. Eleanor's full blood work came back clean at her 6-week follow-up. Dr. Briggs said she was doing remarkably well. Better, he said with a small smile, than most people her age who had not been under any particular stress. He did not know what the last 2 months had cost her. I did. She stood at the kitchen sink that evening washing the dinner dishes, and I watched her from the doorway the way I have watched her for 42 years. The same woman. The same hands that had planted gardens and raised a family and signed her name to a life we had built together in good faith. Someone had tried to use her name without her permission. Someone had tried to end her story before she was finished writing it. They had failed. Because they had not accounted for the one thing they should have seen coming from the very beginning. Her husband. Marcus entered a plea agreement 4 months later. Restitution. Probation. The forged accounts were dissolved. The drafted property transfers were nullified. Raymond Chalk lost his license permanently and faced a separate criminal charge for the notary fraud. I did not attend the proceedings. I had said everything I needed to say in that dining room, with a folder and a drone photograph and 42 years of quiet patience laid out on the table. What I remember most about those months is not the legal outcome. It is not the courtroom or the paperwork or the investigator's card on my desk. What I remember is Eleanor in the garden the following April, down on her knees in the good dirt, pressing seeds into the row she had prepared. Tomatoes again, sunflowers, sweet basil. Humming the way she always does when she is exactly where she wants to be. She looked up at me and smiled. I thought about a clearing in the woods. Orange stakes, white ribbon. I thought about how close it had all come. And then I thought about how it had not. Because some things are worth protecting until your last breath, and some men are exactly patient enough to do what that protection requires. Eleanor pressed another seed into the earth. The garden came back that year better than it ever had. Some roots, it turns out, go deeper than anyone standing above the ground can see. And some old men still know exactly where to look. If this story moved something in you today, if it reminded you that patience is its own kind of strength, please consider subscribing to this channel. Every week we bring you a new story about dignity, truth, and the quiet courage of people who refuse to be erased. Leave a comment below. Tell us, what would you have done? We read every single one. And stay right here, because the next story begins where this one ends. With a secret no one saw coming, and one man who had been waiting a very long time to reveal it.